The orbital station HFY spun slowly above a pale green moon, its lights blinking like tiny stars against the dark. Inside dormitory pod 47C, four alien students sat in a tight circle on the floor, staring at a single piece of paper as if it might explode. The paper was a registration notice. It said that their new roommate, a human named Daniel Reyes, would arrive in exactly 47 minutes. Tuvin, the tall Brockary with smooth gray skin and 3 long fingers on each hand, read the notice for the 11th time. His voice was shaky. He looked at his roommates and asked, "Are we sure the cushions are enough?" Kwesi, the soft-shelled Melisser, wobbled on her short legs. Her shell was pale blue and very fragile. She had spent the entire morning gluing extra padding to the corners of the desks, the bunk beds, the kitchen counter, and even the door frame. "I added foam to the ceiling too," she said, pointing up, "just in case he jumps." Halleck, the four-eyed Druvian, was sitting in front of a small hollow screen. All 4 of his eyes blinked at different times as he scrolled through a long document titled Earth Predator Species, a cautious guide. "The book says humans can run for hours without stopping," he said slowly. "It also says they evolved by chasing their food until it died of tiredness." Senel, the plant-based Florin, made a soft rustling sound. His green leaves shivered along his arms. "Maybe we should hide the snacks," he whispered. "What if he thinks we are food?" The 4 of them sat in silence for a long moment. Then the door chime rang. Tuvin stood up so fast that he banged his head on the new ceiling foam. He hurried to the door, took a deep breath, and pressed the open button. A young human stood on the other side. He was shorter than they had expected. He had messy brown hair, a backpack slung over one shoulder, and a wide, friendly smile. He carried a small duffel bag in one hand. His other hand was holding a paper towel against his arm. "Hey guys," Daniel said brightly. "I'm Daniel. Sorry I'm a little late. I tripped on the boarding ramp on the way in. Stupid me, right?" The 4 roommates stared at him. None of them moved. Daniel walked into the pod, dropped his duffel bag near the door, and looked around. "Oh wow, you guys really decorated this place. Is the foam a HFY thing?" Kwesi finally found her voice. You said you tripped?" "Yeah, just a scrape." Daniel pulled the paper towel away from his arm. A long red line ran from his elbow to his wrist. Blood had already dried along the edges, and a thin trail still showed near the bottom. "Caught it on a metal bolt. No big deal." Senel made a high squeaking noise and dropped 2 of his leaves on the floor. Halleck rushed forward with the emergency medical kit, his 4 eyes wide. "Sit down, please. Sit. We have bandages. We have sealant gel. We have pain medication. Tuvin, get the scanner." "Oh, this." Daniel laughed. He pulled a small bandage out of his pocket, peeled the back off, and slapped it across the cut. "There. Good as new. So where's the cafeteria? I'm starving." Tuvin froze with the scanner in his hand. He looked at Halleck. Halleck looked at Kwesi. Kwesi looked at Senel. Senel was now picking up his leaves from the carpet, looking very confused. "You do not want medical attention?" Tuvin asked carefully. "For a scratch." Daniel grinned. "Nah, man. I'd feel silly. Back on Earth, my dad used to say if you can still wiggle it, you don't need a doctor." He wiggled his fingers to demonstrate. The cut moved with them, but he did not even flinch. Kwesi sat down on the floor very suddenly. She did not stand up again for several minutes. Daniel did not seem to notice. He unzipped his duffel bag and pulled out a few items, a small photo of his family, a folded jacket, and a strange round object he called a baseball. He placed them on his bunk and looked around with a happy smile. "This place is awesome. I'm gonna love it here." That night, after Daniel had eaten 3 full plates of cafeteria food and gone to bed, the 4 roommates gathered in the common area. Halleck opened the shared chat log on his tablet. His fingers trembled slightly as he typed. The message read, "Human acquired. Already bleeding. Status, unbothered." Tuvin added a second line. "He is sleeping now. The wound is still on his arm. He did not change the bandage. He says he will check it in the morning." Kwesi reached over and added a third line. "I am scared." Senel curled his leaves tightly. He typed last. "Should we tell the headmaster?" The 4 of them sat in silence and watched the message blink on the screen. From the bunk room, they could hear Daniel snoring softly. He sounded peaceful. He sounded like someone who had not just walked through a sliding door with a bleeding arm and called it nothing. Tuvin turned off the tablet. He looked at his roommates with a serious face. "We need to be careful," he said quietly. We do not yet know what he is capable of. Outside the pod window, the green moon kept turning. The semester had just begun. A week passed. The pod smelled like cooking spices, and the small kitchen had become the center of everything. It was Thursday evening, and the 5 roommates had agreed to make a group meal together. The academy called it Cultural Cooking Night, where students prepared dishes from their home worlds and shared them around the table. Senel had brought a pot of warm root broth from the Florin Gardens, made with bright orange leaves that gave off a sweet smell. Kwesi was carefully measuring sea salts from her ocean home, her soft hands wrapped in cloth gloves to protect her shell. Halleck was reading a recipe out loud from a glowing tablet, his 4 eyes scanning the screen as he stirred a thick purple sauce. Tuvin was chopping mushrooms slowly and carefully, the way his mother had taught him on his home planet. Daniel stood at the far end of the counter with a large knife and a pile of tough alien roots. He had volunteered to cut them into small cubes. The roots were called grembas, and they were known across the galaxy for being almost as hard as soft stone. "You sure you can handle those?" Tuvin asked, watching from the side. "The kitchen drone can do it. It is built for hard vegetables." "Nah, I got it," Daniel said with a smile. He held up the knife. "My uncle was a chef. I've been chopping stuff since I was a kid." He started slicing. The knife came down with steady taps, and the grembas split into neat cubes one after another. Kwesi watched from across the counter, slightly impressed. Daniel hummed a tune from Earth that none of them recognized. The kitchen felt warm and friendly. Then the knife slipped. It happened in less than a second. The blade hit a hard spot on the gremba, slid sideways, and came down across the side of Daniel's left thumb. There was a soft thump and a small splatter of red on the cutting board. Kwesi let out a high-pitched squeal, the kind of sound a small animal makes when it is suddenly stepped on. She stumbled backward, knocked over her bowl of sea salt, and grabbed the edge of the counter with both hands to keep from falling. Senel's leaves curled inward so fast that he looked half his normal size. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," he whispered. He could not look at the blood. Florins reacted badly to red liquid. It reminded them of the sap of a dying tree. Halleck dropped the spoon into the sauce and ran across the kitchen. "Scanner! Get the scanner! Tuvin, call the medical drone!" Tuvin was already moving toward the wall panel. His hand shook as he reached for the emergency button. Whoa, hold on," Daniel said. He was looking at his thumb with a small frown, the way a person looks at a stain on a shirt. "It's just a kitchen cut, guys. Relax." Halleck stopped in the middle of the floor. "Just a kitchen cut? You are bleeding. There is bleeding. On the food. On the gremba, technically," Daniel said. He walked calmly to the sink, turned on the cold water, and stuck his thumb under it. The water ran pink for a few seconds. Daniel did not even change his expression. He just stood there, looking at the running water like he was washing dishes. After a moment, he turned off the tap, grabbed a paper towel from the rack, and wrapped it tightly around his thumb. He pressed down for about 30 seconds, then opened the cabinet above the sink and pulled out a small first aid kit he had brought from Earth. "This stuff is so handy," he said cheerfully. He took out a small bandage, peeled it open with his teeth, and wrapped it around his thumb. He moved like he had done this 100 times before. "Okay," he said. "Where was I?" He walked back to the cutting board, picked up the knife, and started chopping the grembas again. This time he used his other hand to hold the vegetable, keeping his bandaged thumb out of the way. Tuvin was still standing by the wall panel, his finger hovering over the emergency button. He slowly lowered his hand. He looked at Halleck. Halleck looked at Senel. Senel was trying very hard not to look at anything at all. Kwesi finally let go of the counter. Her voice came out very small. "Daniel, do you not feel pain?" Daniel laughed. "Of course I feel pain. It hurts a little. But come on, it's not like I cut the whole thumb off." He held up his hand and wiggled the wrapped thumb to prove it still worked. "My grandma used to say if it ain't squirting, it ain't worth a doctor." The 4 roommates stared at him. None of them understood what squirting meant in this case. None of them wanted to ask. Dinner was finished an hour later. Daniel ate 2 helpings of stew. He talked about his cousin who once broke a tooth biting into a frozen apple and just kept eating around the broken side for a week. He laughed about the story like it was the funniest thing in the world. That night, after Daniel had gone to bed, the 4 roommates met again in the common area. Tuvin had brought a new notebook. He wrote on the front in careful letters, "Observations on human behavior." Halleck opened the first page. He wrote a single line at the top. Subject Daniel survived deep thumb cut. Refused medical care. Returned to chopping vegetables within 40 seconds. Quessy added underneath. Is he brave? Or is he broken? Senel curled his leaves and whispered, I think we may never know. Outside the pod, the lights of the station flickered softly. Somewhere down the hall, a door chimed. The semester was just getting started, and the 4 aliens were beginning to understand that they had a very long year ahead of them. The poster on the Academy notice board was bright yellow and impossible to miss. It announced the Interspecies Recreational Tournament, a weekend event where students from different worlds could play their home games for fun. Daniel had stopped in front of the poster, read the small print, and signed up for the human exhibition match within 10 seconds. The game was called Pickup Basketball. He had written his name on the list and walked away whistling. His 4 roommates had not been so calm. Pickup Basketball, Halleck read aloud, scrolling through a translation file. The word pickup is concerning. What are they picking up? Each other, perhaps, Senel said softly. Or pieces of each other. Tubin had simply written a new line in the observation notebook. Subject volunteered for physical activity. Unknown risk level. Planned to attend match for safety reasons. So on Saturday afternoon, the 4 aliens sat together in the bleachers of the indoor sports arena, holding small drinks and snacks. The arena was full of curious students from every species at the Academy. The court below was wooden and shiny, with painted lines and 2 metal hoops on each end. Daniel and 5 other human exchange students from nearby stations stood in a loose circle, stretching their arms and laughing. A horn sounded. The game began. Within seconds, the aliens in the bleachers realized this was nothing like any sport they had ever seen. The humans ran. They ran hard, in different directions, all at the same time. They jumped. They threw the ball through the hoops. They bumped into each other on purpose. They smiled while doing it. Quessy held her drink with both hands. Why are they hitting each other? I think that is part of the game, Tuvin said carefully. I do not like it, Senel whispered. Daniel was good. Even the alien students could see that. He moved fast for someone his size, ducking under taller players and passing the ball with quick flicks of his wrist. He scored twice in the first few minutes. The crowd of mixed-species spectators clapped politely, unsure of when clapping was correct. Then it happened. Daniel jumped for a high ball. Another human jumped at the same time. They both stretched their arms up, twisted in the air, and crashed back down to the wooden court. Daniel landed hard on his right shoulder. There was a sound, a very clear sound, loud enough that even the aliens in the back row heard it. It was a crack. The arena went silent. The other human players stopped in place. Quessy made the small, squealing noise again and slid sideways in her seat. Senel lost 3 leaves at once, which floated down toward the floor. Halleck covered all 4 of his eyes with his hands. Tuvin stood up halfway, gripping the railing in front of him. Down on the court, Daniel was lying on his back. He blinked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he muttered something quietly. The aliens could just barely hear him. "Aw man, not again." He sat up slowly. His right arm hung at a strange angle. The shoulder did not look right. It looked like it was pushed too far forward. The arena was so quiet that the soft creak of the wooden floor was the loudest sound in the room. A medical drone began to float toward the court, its lights blinking red and blue. But before it reached him, Daniel did something that none of the aliens were prepared for. He grabbed his right arm with his left hand. He took a slow breath. He braced his elbow against his side. And then he twisted. There was another sound. A sharper, deeper crack. The kind of sound that should not come from a body. The kind of sound that should be followed by a long scream. Daniel made a small grunt. That was all. Then he rolled his shoulder a few times, opened and closed his hand, and stood up. "All good," he called out to the medical drone. He waved it off. "Just popped out. I'm fine now." The drone hovered in confused silence. The other players stared at him. The crowd stared at him. Then, slowly, one of the other human players started laughing. A second one joined in. Daniel grinned and jogged back toward the center of the court. The game continued. In the bleachers, Halleck was writing furiously in the notebook. His handwriting was barely readable. He wrote, "Human anatomy may include self-repair function. We'll investigate further." 6 minutes later, Daniel jumped again. This time he caught the ball cleanly and threw it through the hoop just before the final horn sounded. His team won. The other humans rushed over to slap him on the back, on the same shoulder he had just twisted back into place. Daniel laughed and slapped them back. The four roommates were waiting for him by the side of the court when the game ended. They had the medical kit. They had the scanner. They had 3 different kinds of cold packs. Daniel walked up to them, sweaty and smiling. Hey, what's up? You guys watched the whole game. Tubin held out the medical kit silently. Oh, this. Daniel rolled his shoulder. Yeah, I dislocated it in high school once. After that, it kind of pops out easy. I just push it back in. No big deal. No big deal, Halleck repeated slowly. His voice was very flat. Yeah, Daniel said. Hey, you guys hungry? I'm starving. Let's get pizza from the cafeteria. He walked off toward the exit, whistling that same Earth tune again. The 4 aliens followed him in stunned silence. That night, Tubin wrote a new entry. Subject: Daniel relocates own joints. Considers this normal. Recommendation: do not engage in human sport without armor. Senel underlined the word armor twice. The Advanced Materials Engineering classroom was on the lower level of the academy, deep inside the station where the gravity ran a little heavier and the air smelled faintly of metal. Long workbenches lined the walls. Each bench had its own pressure clamp, a small set of measuring tools, and a thick safety screen that could slide up from the floor in case of emergency. The professor, a tall reptilian Sorvex named Dr. Valis, walked slowly between the rows as he gave the day's instructions. Today you will test the tensile strength of 3 alloys, he said. His voice was deep and slow, the way Sorvex always spoke. Work in pairs. Be careful. The clamps are old. Some of them stick. Daniel and Tubin were assigned to bench number 4. Tubin had been quiet all morning, still thinking about the basketball game from the weekend. He had not slept well. He kept hearing the cracking sound in his head. Daniel, on the other hand, was cheerful as always. He pulled on the safety gloves, tightened the strap on his goggles, and clapped his hands together. All right, partner. Let's see what these alloys are made of. They began with the first sample, a thin gray bar that bent easily under the clamp. They recorded the numbers. Then they moved to the second sample, a thicker blue bar that took more pressure to bend. They recorded those numbers too. Tubin started to relax. The work was steady. The clamps were working fine. Then they loaded the third sample. It was a small piece of dark red metal, shaped like a thick coin. Daniel placed it in the clamp and tightened the screws. Tubin started the pressure machine. The needle on the dial began to rise. Slowly at first, then faster. Something on the clamp clicked. It was not a normal click. Tubin, Daniel said calmly. Did that sound right to you? Before Tubin could answer, the clamp snapped. It happened in a single instant. The metal coin shot sideways out of the broken clamp. A thin shard of the clamp itself broke off and flew across the bench. The whole classroom froze as the piece of metal moved through the air. There was a soft thump. The shard had buried itself in the side of Daniel's left calf, just above the ankle. It was sticking out at an angle, maybe 2 inches deep, with a thin line of blood running down toward his shoe. The room went silent. Dr. Valis, halfway across the classroom, slammed his hand on the emergency button. The safety screens hissed up around every bench. Red lights began to spin near the ceiling. Medical team to Lab 3. Dr. Valis called into his wrist communicator. Student injury. Sharp object embedded. Tubin had gone completely still. He could not move. He could not speak. He just stared at the metal in Daniel's leg. Daniel looked down at his own leg. His face did not change much. He tilted his head slightly to one side. Then he said one word. Huh. That was all. Just huh. Like a person who had just noticed it might rain. Tubin finally found his voice. Daniel, there is metal in your leg. Yeah, I see it, Daniel said. He carefully lowered himself to sit on the lab floor, stretching his injured leg out in front of him. The shard moved a little as he sat. He winced slightly, then smiled. Could you grab my water bottle? He asked. It's on the bench. Tubin moved without thinking. He picked up the bottle and handed it over. Daniel took a long sip. He looked at the shard sticking out of his leg the way a person might look at a small stain on their pants. Hey, Daniel said. Take a picture. My buddies back on Earth are gonna love this. Tubin nearly dropped the bottle. A picture. Yeah, for the group chat. They send me weird stuff all the time. I gotta send something back. Daniel pulled out his own small communicator and handed it over. Tubin took the picture with shaking fingers. The image showed Daniel sitting on the floor, smiling, with metal sticking out of his calf and a water bottle in his hand. The medical team arrived 2 minutes later. A wide-eyed Melisser doctor rushed in, took one look at Daniel, and nearly tripped over her own legs. She knelt beside him, scanned the wound, and began to speak quickly in medical terms. "Pain scale, please," she said. 1 to 10. Be honest. Daniel thought about it. He tapped his finger on the water bottle. He scratched his chin. The doctor waited. "Honestly," he said, "I'd say a 4. Maybe a 4.5. I had a worse splinter in my hand last summer when I was helping my dad build a deck." The doctor stared at him. "A 4. Yeah, a 4. It's not in the bone. Just muscle, I think." The doctor turned to look at Dr. Vallis. Dr. Vallis looked at the medical scanner. The scanner agreed with Daniel. The shard had missed the bone by a fraction of an inch. It had gone through muscle only. "We need to remove it in the medical bay," the doctor said carefully. "Cool," Daniel said. "Can I keep it?" "You know, after." The doctor blinked all 6 of her eyelids. "Keep it?" "Yeah, as a souvenir. To remember the day." By that evening, the story had spread through the entire academy. Students from all species stopped in the hallways just to look at Daniel as he walked past, his leg wrapped in a bandage but otherwise fine. Some bowed slightly. Some whispered. Some just stared. The phrase, "the 4 out of 10 human," was already trending on the academy's student message board. Back in the pod, Tuvin opened the observation notebook with a slow hand. He wrote a single line, very neatly. Subject rates pain by comparing it to splinters. Splinters are now a unit of measurement. He underlined it 3 times. The pod was quieter than usual that evening. Senel had brewed a large pot of warm Florin tea, the kind made from soft yellow petals that smelled like honey and rain. 5 small cups sat on the round table in the common area, steaming gently. The lights were turned low. The 4 roommates had agreed, after a long whispered meeting in the hallway, that tonight was the night they would finally ask Daniel the question that had been keeping all of them awake. Daniel sat on the floor cushion with his bandaged leg stretched out. He looked perfectly relaxed. He was chewing on a piece of dried fruit that Kwesi had given him and humming softly to himself. He had no idea that the night had been carefully planned. Tuvin cleared his throat. He had practiced this moment 3 times in front of the mirror. "Daniel, we want to ask you something. Something important." "Sure thing," Daniel said. He set the dried fruit aside. "What's up?" Senel went first. His voice was very gentle. He had been chosen to ask the question because Florins were considered the softest speakers among the 4. "Daniel," he said, "we have been worried about you. Truly worried. We have seen many things this semester. The cut, the shoulder, the metal in your leg, and many smaller things, too. The hot stove last week. The door you walked into on Tuesday. The time you stubbed your toe and laughed." Daniel smiled. "Yeah, that was a good one. Right on the corner of the bed frame." "Daniel," Senel said carefully, "do humans not feel pain like other species?" There was a long silence. The 4 aliens leaned forward. They had been waiting weeks for this answer. Then Daniel started laughing. He laughed so hard that he nearly choked on his tea. He held up one hand, trying to stop, but the laughter kept coming. He wiped his eyes. He took a deep breath. He laughed again. "Oh man," he said finally. "Oh, you guys. You really thought we don't feel it?" Kwesi blinked her large round eyes. "You do feel it?" "Of course we feel it," Daniel said. "Pain hurts. It hurts a lot. We have the same nerves you have. We have all the same pain signals. Trust me, when that metal hit my leg, it stung like crazy." Halleck was now writing very fast. "Then why? Why did you not react? Why did you ask for a picture?" Daniel leaned back on his cushion. He thought for a moment. His face grew a little more serious, though he was still smiling. "It's a culture thing," he said. "On Earth, we kind of grow up learning to push through stuff. Not because we are tough or because we don't feel it. We just do. Because life keeps going. Things still need to get done. Complaining doesn't fix anything." The 4 aliens listened in complete silence. "My grandpa," Daniel went on, "once had a heart attack. A real heart attack. You know what he did? He drove himself to the hospital. Didn't call anyone. Said he didn't want to bother the ambulance crew. They were busy with other people." Senel made a small noise. His leaves curled. "My mom went back to work 3 weeks after I was born," Daniel said. "My dad worked construction for 30 years. He came home one day with a broken finger, taped it to the next finger with electrical tape, and went back to work the next morning. Said it didn't make sense to lose a day of pay for a finger he wasn't using much anyway." Tuvin's mouth was hanging slightly open. "I knew a guy in school," Daniel continued, who broke his ankle during a soccer game, played the rest of the match because his team was short a player. After the game, he asked his dad to drive him to the hospital. His dad asked if it could wait until after dinner. "Stop," Kwesi whispered. "There's more," Daniel said. "My aunt gave birth to my cousin in the back of a taxi. Then she got out, paid the driver, and walked into the hospital holding the baby. She said the driver had been so nice, she didn't want to ruin his upholstery." The 4 roommates were now staring at him with wide eyes. "And the thing is," Daniel said softly, "none of these people are heroes. None of them are special. They are just normal humans. That is just how we are. We hurt. We just keep moving." Halleck slowly set down his stylus. He looked at the others. The notebook was full of writing. None of it felt useful anymore. "But why?" Senel asked. His voice was very small. "Why do you do this?" Daniel shrugged. He picked up his teacup. "Because stuff still needs to get done. And complaining doesn't fix anything." Halleck wrote that sentence down word for word. He underlined it. He stared at it for a long time. Tuvin sat very still. Something had shifted in his understanding. Humans were not stronger than other species. They were not braver. They were not numb to pain. They simply had decided, somewhere in their long history, that suffering was not a reason to stop. The whole species had made that choice. And they passed it down from one generation to the next, like a song or a recipe. It was somehow more frightening than if they had just been tough. "Daniel," Kwesi asked carefully, "what would make a human stop? What kind of injury would make you say, 'I cannot keep going'?" Daniel scratched his chin. He thought for a long moment. He took a slow sip of tea. "Honestly," he said, "I don't know. Maybe if I couldn't walk. But even then, I'd probably crawl." He smiled. He took another sip of tea. The conversation drifted on to other things, to school, to homework, to the cafeteria's new dessert. Daniel laughed at something Kwesi said. He patted Senel on the shoulder and told him the tea was wonderful. But the 4 aliens did not forget the answer. They never would. That night, Halleck closed the notebook and put it on a high shelf. He did not open it again for the rest of the semester. There was nothing left to write. The grand auditorium of Helion 9 was packed. Every seat was taken. Students from 40 different species had gathered to watch the end of semester showcase, where each cultural representative would present something from their home world. The stage was wide and round, with soft golden lights shining down from above. The air was full of soft music and the low hum of 300 conversations. On stage, a Druvian student had just finished reading a long, beautiful poem about the silver rivers of her home moon. The audience clapped politely. A Sorvex had played a slow song on a curved string instrument carved from river stone. The audience clapped politely. A Melisser had performed a graceful underwater dance using a tank of clear water and soft floating lights. The audience clapped politely. Then the announcer's voice came over the speakers. Next on stage, representing the planet Earth, we welcome Daniel Reyes. Daniel walked out onto the stage. He was carrying a small wooden crate. He set it down in the middle of the stage. He looked out at the huge audience, smiled, and gave them a small friendly wave. In the front row, his 4 roommates were sitting together. Tuvin was holding the observation notebook on his lap, just in case. Senel was clutching a small piece of cloth, ready to cover his eyes. Kwesi had brought an extra cup of tea. Halleck was leaning forward, all 4 of his eyes wide and alert. "Hello, everyone," Daniel said into the microphone. "Thank you for having me. I thought a lot about what to share tonight." The other students did amazing presentations. Poetry, music, dance. I cannot do any of those things very well. A small laugh ran through the audience. "So I thought I would do something different," Daniel said. "Tonight, I am going to share with you something every single human knows. Something that connects all of us, from every country and every age. I am going to demonstrate the most common household injuries on Earth and how we handle them." The 4 roommates exchanged worried glances. Tuvin's grip on the notebook tightened. Daniel reached into the crate and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He held it up. "Injury number 1, he said. The paper cut. He slid the edge of the paper across his finger. There was a tiny line of red. The audience gasped. A few students stood up in alarm. Daniel held up his hand. "Watch closely," he said. He stuck his finger in his mouth and sucked on it. "This is what every human does. Every single one. No one knows why. It does not help. But we all do it." The audience stared in stunned silence. Daniel set the paper down and walked toward the corner of the wooden crate. Injury number 2. The stubbed toe. He kicked the corner of the crate hard with his bare foot. There was a thump. Daniel froze in place. His face turned slightly red. His eyes watered. For a full 20 seconds he stood there, completely silent, holding his foot. He did not scream. He did not cry. He just stood there, breathing through clenched teeth, looking at the ceiling with the face of a person who had seen the end of the universe. The audience was holding its breath. Then Daniel exhaled. He shook his foot out. He smiled. "That is the silent rage," he said. "Every human has felt it. It is a sacred experience." The audience erupted in confused, fascinated whispers. Halleck was already writing again. He had pulled the notebook back out of the bag. Daniel walked across the stage. Injury number 3. Slipping on a wet floor. He pretended to slip. He caught himself dramatically, waved his arms in the air, and then quickly stood up straight. He looked left. He looked right. He looked behind him. "This," he said, "is the most important part. After a human almost falls, we look around to see if anyone saw it. If no one saw it, then it did not happen. This is a very old human tradition." The audience laughed. A real laugh, this time. The laughter spread through the rows like a wave. Daniel went on. He demonstrated the dreaded act of stepping barefoot onto a small sharp toy left on the floor by a child. He showed the audience what it looks like when a human burns their tongue on hot food and tries to keep eating it anyway, breathing in and out through an open mouth like a confused fish. He explained the ice cream headache, the splinter that you cannot find, the sunburn that you forget about until you lean against a wall, and the sneeze that you feel coming but cannot release. The audience was completely silent. Some were recording. Some were taking notes. Some were quietly weeping, though no one could say exactly why. At the back of the auditorium, the headmaster of the academy, an ancient Druvian with silver fur and 7 academic medals pinned to his robe, slowly rose from his seat. The room turned to look at him. He began to clap. He clapped slowly at first, then faster. Other students joined him, then more, then all 300 of them. Daniel stood on stage and gave a small, awkward bow. He looked surprised. He had not expected the standing ovation. Back in the pod that night, the 4 roommates were waiting for him with a homemade cake. Senel had baked it himself from his grandmother's recipe. Kwesi had decorated it with small blue frosting flowers. Halleck had written, "Welcome home," legend in careful letters across the top. Daniel walked in and saw the cake. His face lit up. "You guys made this for me?" "We did," Tuvin said. He stepped forward. He was holding something small in his hands. It was wrapped in soft cloth. He handed it to Daniel. Daniel unwrapped it slowly. Inside was the metal shard from the lab accident, cleaned and polished, mounted on a small wooden plaque. Engraved on the plaque were the words, "To our human friend. Pain level 4. Legend level 10. Daniel laughed. He hugged each of them, one at a time. He thanked them. He told them this was the best semester of his life. Then he turned to walk toward his bunk, his eyes still on the plaque in his hands. He did not look up. His head bumped hard against the low edge of the bunk ceiling. There was a thump. The 4 roommates froze. Daniel did not even flinch. He just rubbed the spot, smiled, and kept walking. Outside the window, the green moon kept turning. The semester was over. The truth was out. And humanity, somehow, had once again left the rest of the galaxy speechless.